皆さん、こんにちは. Today, I want to introduce another very important concept for studying Japanese. We're going to start talking about our first set of verbs. So once we've learned these words, we'll be able to talk a lot more about the things that we do and the things that other people do. Let's get started. So the first concept I want to talk about with regards to talking about verbs is the kind of forms that we have in Japanese of verbs. There are two main forms that we are going to talk about today. One is the dictionary form, and the other is the mas form. You may have heard these called the plain form and polite form if you study Japanese elsewhere. They're both the same thing. So we use the dictionary forms at the end of sentences in casual speech. So that means when we're talking to our friends, when we're talking to our family, maybe when we're talking to, a girlfriend or boyfriend, those are places to use casual speech. On the other hand, we use the mas forms when we want to talk to, for example, our sensei, or maybe somebody that we don't know very well, somebody who's older than us, our boss at work. These are places to use mas forms. Right now, because we're just beginning in Japanese and we're going to be talking in a lot of situations where we talk to classmates or we talk to our sensei, we're going to stick with the mas forms for a while. So once again, the dictionary forms, these plain forms, we tend to end sentences in very casual speech. The mas forms, we tend to end sentences in more polite speech. You will also sometimes see the dictionary form used in newspaper articles where we have to save a lot of space, or in diaries because you're writing to yourself and you don't need to be extra polite with yourself. On the other hand, we see a lot of mas forms when we write letters or emails. You will also start to see dictionary forms when we get into the slightly higher levels. They'll appear a lot in more complex grammar. That said, for right now, we are just going to focus on the mas forms of verbs. So we're going to start out by learning our verbs in mas form. So what is mas form exactly? Basically, mas form is the quote-unquote present tense. It's the not past version of verbs. And the non-past tense means exactly what it sounds like. It's the tense that is not in the past. So we can think of it as the present, but it also can kind of include the future. So we can use this form to talk about either what we do all the time, what we do as a habit, or what we're going to do in the future. It works for both. And we can tell which one it is based on the context. One of the really nice things about Japanese, compared to, say, French or Spanish or English, is that we don't have to change the way that the verb sounds based on who is doing the action. The verb is always the same no matter who does it. So I study, you study, we study, Takeshi-san studies, he studies, she studies, they study. That's all the same word in Japanese. So we can say, for example, 私は勉強します. I study, or I will study. And we can say, Takeshi-san wa benkyou shimasu. Takeshi studies, or Takeshi will study. These are the exact same verb in Japanese. So let's take a look at some of our verbs that we're going to introduce this chapter. If you want, you might want to take a look at the verb list that we've made. So the first one is 行きます. 行きます. To go. 行きます. Next we have 来ます. 来ます. To come. Our next one, also a movement verb, is 帰ります. 帰ります. We don't really have a word like this in English, so it may be a little bit hard to understand, but 帰ります we use specifically for going back to your home or going back to like your hometown or your home country. So 帰ります, you're returning back to where you came from. Our next is 食べます. 食べます. To eat. 食べます. Next is 飲みます. 飲みます. To drink. 飲みます. So let's review the ones that we have studied so far. Pause the video for a minute and see if you can identify which verb each one of the pictures is. Are you ready? Let's check. This one is 帰ります. 来ます. The next one is 行きます. Then at the bottom, we have 飲みます and 食べます. Okay, let's talk about some more verbs. Our next one is 見ます. To see, to look at, to watch. So when we watch TV, for instance, that's 見ます. 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 Next is 読みます. 読みます. To read. 読みます. The next one is 聞きます. 聞きます. To listen or to hear. 聞きます. Next one we have is 買います. To buy. 買います. 買います. Next we have 話します. 話します. To speak. 話します. So let's practice the new verbs that we've looked at. Pause the video for a minute and see if you can identify the verb based on the picture. Ready? Okay, let's check together. The first one, on the top left, 話します. Top right, 聞きます. In the middle, 買います. Bottom left, 見ます. Bottom right, 読みます. Great job! Let's look at a few more. 起きます. 起きます. To wake up. 起きます. 寝ます. To sleep. 寝ます. 寝ます. します. So this verb means like to do. The meaning is to do, but we use it a little bit more broadly in Japanese than we do in English. So we will introduce them as we go along, but there are a lot of words where we wouldn't necessarily say to do in English, but we do say shimasu in Japanese. For example, in Japanese, instead of saying to play tennis, we say like to do tennis. テニスをします. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then we have 勉強します. 勉強します. To study. 勉強します. These verbs are ones that we will talk about a little bit more in the next chapter, but I wanted to kind of get you started on them so that you know what to look for when we get to them. We have two verbs, arimasu and imasu. Both of them mean like there is, there are something, or to have something. But we use these, we use arimasu for inanimate objects, and imasu for animate. In other words, people and animals. We use imasu. We will talk a little bit more about these later, but I just wanted to give you a preview. So, arimasu, we can say like, there is a book, or I have a book. There is a table, or I have a computer. I have a car. That is arimasu. We can use imasu to say like, there is a person, there is a cat, there is a dog, I have a cat, I have a sister. We'll talk a little bit more about these later, but for now, we just want to remember the words arimasu and imasu. So let's take a look at our verbs one more time. You can pause the video if you want a minute. See if you can figure out which verbs match with which pictures. Ready? Let's check together. 帰ります. Top left is 帰ります. Top middle, 来ます. Top right, 行きます. Bottom left, 飲みます. Bottom right, 食べます. How about these? I'll give you a minute once again to find out which verbs match. So top left, 話します. Top right, 聞きます. Middle, 買います. Bottom left, 見ます. Bottom right, 読みます. How about these? Take a minute to see if you can figure out which ones match which verb. Okay, top left, 勉強します. Top middle, 起きます. Top right, 寝ます. Bottom left, します. Bottom middle, います. And bottom right, あります. So these are the new verbs that we are going to talk about in this chapter. Once again, when we have these mas verbs, these are all in the present tense affirmative. So when we say the present tense in Japanese, we mean once again, either we're talking about something that we do all the time as a habit, like I study, or something that we're going to do in the future. I will study. And it's the same whether it's me or Takeshi-san or we or they or she or he. No matter who is doing it, the verb is the same. So, 私は勉強します. I study or I will study. Takeshi-sanは勉強します. Takeshi studies or Takeshi will study. So when we want to make a sentence with these present affirmative verbs, the pattern is we have our person who does it, smiley-san, wa, and then the verb with mas. So smiley-san does blah, 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 blah. Smiley-san is going to do blah, 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 blah. It could work either way, depending on the context. So let's take a look at some examples. スマイリーさんは毎日勉強します。スマイリーさんは毎日勉強します。What does Smiley-san do? He studies. So, and we know that this is about him studying, like he studies as a habit, because this word 毎日 can give us a hint. 毎日 means every day. So we can use the context to help us. On the other hand, this one says, スマイリーさんは明日勉強します。明日勉強します。明日 means tomorrow. So this gives us a hint that we mean Smiley-san will study. So the verb stays the same, but something else in the sentence will give us a clue as to whether we're talking about something they do regularly or something they will do in the future. Words like time words can give us that clue. So we talked about how to do the present tense that's affirmative. Now let's talk about how to do the present tense that's negative. So 私は勉強します means I study or I will study. But 私は勉強しません。たけしさんは来ます。So たけしさん will come or たけしさん comes. たけしさんは来ません。たけしさん won't come. I won't study. I don't study. たけしさん doesn't come. So this ません makes the sentence into a negative. It's very straightforward. All we have to do is get rid of the mas and put masen instead. So Smiley-san does not do blah blah blah. Smiley-san is not going to do blah blah blah. So Smiley-san は勉強しません。Smiley-san は勉強しません means that Smiley-san doesn't study. Smiley-san は今日勉強しません. This word gives us a hint that we're probably talking about the future. Smiley-san will not study today. 今日 is today. So once again, we can use the context to help us know if we're talking about their habit or if we're talking about the future. So let's take a look at these verbs and let's see if we can make them negative. So 行きます means to go. How can I say don't go? How can I say someone doesn't go? 行きません. Good job. 来ます to come. How can I say someone doesn't come? 来ません. 帰ります to go back home. How can I say someone doesn't go back home? 帰りません. 食べます to eat. How do I say someone doesn't eat? 食べません. 飲みます to drink. How can I say someone doesn't drink? 飲みません. 聞きます to listen. How can I say someone doesn't listen? 聞きません. 見ます to see or to watch. How can I say someone doesn't watch? 見ません. 話します to speak. How can I say someone doesn't speak? 話しません. 買います to buy. How can I say someone doesn't buy? 買いません.読みます to read. How can I say someone doesn't read? 読みません. 起きます to get up. How can I say that someone doesn't get up? 起きません. 寝ます to go to sleep. How can I say that someone doesn't sleep? 寝ません. します to do or to play. How can I say that someone doesn't do something? しません. 勉強します。To study. How can I say someone doesn't study? 勉強しません。To be or to have with people or animals. So something exists. I have something. How can we say I don't? Something doesn't exist. いません. And to be or to have with things. So how can I say something doesn't exist or I don't have something? We change あります to ありません. Okay, so let's practice just a little bit more with some different verbs. Take a look at these verbs. I'll give you a minute if you need it. How can you say these both in the positive and in the negative in Japanese? So I do and I don't. Top left, 話します。話しません。Top right, 聞きます。聞きません。Middle, 買います。買いません。Bottom left, 見ます。見ません。Bottom right, 読みます。読みません。Okay, let's look at a few more. Once again, I'll give you a minute if you need it. All right, top left, します。しません。Top middle, 起きます。起きません。Top right, 寝ます。寝ません。Bottom left, 勉強します。勉強しません。Then we have います。いません。And あります。ありません。Okay, one last set of verbs. Once again, you can take a minute if you need it. All right, let's check together. We have 帰ります。帰りません。来ます。来ません。行きます。行きません。飲みます。飲みません。食べます。食べません。Okay, so now you have been introduced to all the new verbs that we are going to study in this chapter, and you know how to make them both affirmative and negative. So let's practice a little bit with these new verbs, and then we'll work up to using them in larger context.